Welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm delighted you could join us. I'm Claire Cordeau, I lead the healthcare team here at Simulate, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Bob Celeste, who's going to be presenting his work on simulating the US drug supply chain for the US Drug Supply Chain Security Act. I was so excited when I heard about this piece of work. It not only has informed and been informing national policy, but also it's including some elements of simulation which are really, really useful. So I think people who are listening to it will be interested in this, both from a technical simulation point of view as well as from an application of simulation point of view, if you see what I mean. I'm excited to hear myself what Bob has to say, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome him. I'm going to just go through a couple of housekeeping details. Bob, would you mind moving just to the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So Bob's going to be our main presenter today. His background is GS1, and he's now partner at RC Partners, and I'm sure he'll say more about that. Can you just move to the next slide there, Bob? So just on the housekeeping details, you've all been put onto mute for this so that we can hear, and so that's how your computer's been set up. If you want to ask a question, we'd love you to do that. If you can use your chat panel, which is at the bottom right-hand side, to type your question, then we will pick that up at the end. So at any point that you've got a question or a comment that you want to make, please do that there, and we'll pick it up at the end of the session. And we are recording this, so if you'd like to listen to it again or you'd like to tell a colleague about it, the recording will be available on our online workshop page at simulatehealthcare.com. So without more ado, over to you, Bob, and thank you.
Great, thanks, Claire. And thanks, everyone, for joining the call. I hope you find this interesting. I did want to go through a little bit about just some background experience with simulations, and then I'd like to talk about the problem that was occurring in the U.S. Back in the early 2000s, just so you have an understanding of what we're trying to solve for. And then I'll go through the model. I'll go through pieces of the model that I think that are particularly interesting. We built this model over a period of a few years, so there's a lot in it, but I picked out some pieces that I think that would be interesting for you to see on how you can simulate behavior and processes and software. And then I put a little bit of a small movie in here just so you can see the simulation run and something interesting that it does that we're really pleased with and really helped with the problem that was occurring, and understanding how this may roll out over the next few years. Then I'll talk about the outcomes of the particular simulation, what we got out of it, and what the industry and the regulators got out of it. And then lastly, next steps on what we're going to be doing next with the simulation. So I've been interested in simulations going back to 1985. It probably was my first simulation. And what I've always been interested in is, I guess if they say, I know someone has said, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I think a simulation is worth 1,000 pictures. And there's a lot of ways that we can use this product to show, again, like I said, behavior of people, processes, things, and also look at the expected outcomes if you were to implement those processes. And I think that's really a really powerful part of that. I've used this in banking to flow out international settlements and show how that works and how cash flows between banks. In specialty chemical area, used it for the treasury area to show cash flows, acquisitions, credit, foreign exchange processes. And then in healthcare, what you'll see today also is different areas that we've used it. One is regulatory that you'll see today. It's a combination of regulatory and supply chain, hospital processes, capacity planning, things like that. So a lot of areas where simulation has helped create simplicity out of complex systems. So just to start out, and I wish I had the person that actually said this. They said it at a conference I was at, and this was a security conference where they said the only products that are not counterfeited are products that no one wants. And that was just to underline that there is a tremendous amount of counterfeit in many different industries, things that you'd be surprised that are counterfeited that seem to be not even worth it are counterfeit. And then other things, as you'll see here, that are more than counterfeiting. This is criminal activity at its worst. So just to kind of set the stage about what was happening, and this started to take place in 2000 to 2002. Both the FDA and certain states within the U.S. noticed an increase in counterfeit drug cases that they were prosecuting. And as they started looking at root causes for what was taking place, they uncovered a number of things. First of all, there is low penalties for counterfeiting drugs. If you think about it, we're all seem to be seem to be okay with certain kind of counterfeits, counterfeit purses, counterfeit objects of other industries. But when we're talking about drugs now, we're actually talking about almost poisoning people, and it borders on murder. The high cost of some medications. Some of the medications can cost up to $24,000 per vial. So there's a lot of profit to be made. Also, in some states within the U.S., there were, and I imagine there still are, certain narcotics traffickers realizing that the low penalties, high profit margin, and that they actually had a mature supply chain of their own, albeit an underground supply chain, but they were able to move narcotics and other nefarious goods throughout the U.S., and why not counterfeit drugs? And so they started to take advantage of this. To give you an idea of that, at one point there was a Dade County in Miami had licenses for 3,500 wholesalers of pharmaceuticals, 3,500 in one small county in Miami. Right now we only have, to give an example, across the country about 2,400 across the entire country, and at that point they had 3,500 in one county in Miami. And so this was becoming an issue in that period of time. To give you an idea of what they were doing, this is an example of Neupogen, which is, you see on the left, Amgen's product, and also the counterfeit product next to it. Very close. You really have to know a lot about that label, a lot about the bottle size. I don't know that you'd even pick up on any of this if you were a clinician. The fact that there's 1 millimeter height difference between those two bottles, I doubt if anyone would even notice that, and indeed they didn't. Very little difference in the typeface. Remember, counterfeiters don't have much R&D money to spend except to copy manufacturers' packaging. It's very easy to counterfeit a clear liquid. Any tap, you turn on any tap and you've got the clear liquid there. So very small differences in this. There were some instances back in when this started where counterfeiters were also using legitimate products, so they were purchasing low-strength product that may be worth maybe $400 per vial, and they were sweating off the labels and replacing those labels with higher doses that were worth $4,000 a vial, and selling them and getting them into the legitimate supply chain. Now, I say this, and I don't want to make anybody nervous. Certainly in the U.S., we have one of the most safe supply chains, but there's always, wherever there's a profit to be made, there are counterfeiters usually that are willing to take on that and look for holes in any system. These are security devices, so these are actually holograms that manufacturers put on their products in order to thwart counterfeiters. I've been told by security people that it usually takes about 6 months for a counterfeiter to fake any mechanism that a manufacturer may put on packaging. We did have one case where a counterfeit product had a hologram, and when that was shown to the manufacturer's response was, well, our actual product does not have a hologram on it. So the counterfeiters went one step forward from the manufacturer's actually packaging. Avestin, this happened fairly recently. 3 lots were identified of Roche's Avestin. That's not in the U.S. from the FDA side of it. This particular product contained no active ingredient. You can see that there is a writing on it that's not in English, and it was Roche's labeling, not Genentech's. The interesting thing here, and this is just an observation on my part, not necessarily an official thing, is that at this point in time, February 2012, Turkey had already put into place a track and trace system to track drugs coming into Turkey and have them validated at the pharmacy to be sure that they were not counterfeit. And it's interesting that I think that language there, this was a drug that was bound for Turkey that ended up in the U.S. So what we're about to see here in this simulation, which is a track and trace system through the U.S. supply chain, is trying to thwart this kind of diversion of product from other countries and also counterfeiting. I think about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit less, Alibaba.com made big news in that they went public, and it was always sort of amazing to me because of what they sell and who they sell it to sometimes. They also, you can go on the Alibaba.com right now if you like, and you can see everything you need to start your own counterfeit operation. There are tablet presses that could be used on your kitchen table. They'll sell you the forms of popular drug tablets. They'll also sell you the color to put on those tablets, so you can match Viagra blue, Cialis yellow, whatever you like. They provide everything from soup to nuts to be able to start your own counterfeiting process. So again, just like the clear liquid, counterfeiting is not that hard. What's difficult is getting it into a legitimate supply chain, and this is what we were wrestling with back in that 2003 time period. So not only is this a U.S. issue, it's a worldwide issue. There are different places in the world where the issue is greater, certainly than the U.S. supply chain. But more and more countries are starting to require that items or medications are uniquely identified, that is, each bottle or packet is identified uniquely and tracked through their own supply chains. So the industry, as they started to work with us, was aware of what was taking place in the United States, the items that I just showed you, but also aware of the fact that their products were being counterfeited, and regulators around the world were starting to create legislation and regulation to address the issue. So this was really a worldwide issue, not necessarily just the U.S. issue or a particular state's issue. And so we brought together the U.S. supply chain, different participants in the U.S. supply chain, all the way from manufacturers to wholesalers to retailers to hospitals, repackagers. There are about 17 different entities that participate in the supply chain to look at how we could create a standard way of sharing data to be able to track pharmaceuticals through the U.S. supply chain and indeed the whole world. So we started out with developing static diagrams, and they pretty quickly became very difficult to maintain. It was hard to diagram behavior, and that was really what we were trying to do here, was understand how products move through the supply chain, how they could be either counterfeited or introduced to the supply chain in ways that we weren't thinking about in a normal supply chain, and how to track them and pass the information along that was needed for the laws that were taking place, mostly in California. So this was the law at that point in time coming out of California. They had the most rigid law. There was a lot of states that had laws, and basically it was to be able to pass this kind of information about the product itself and the serial number on the vial or the bottle or packet, information about the ownership as it changed as that product moved through the supply chain, and also who was certifying that the data was correct for the products itself. So that was the outcome that was expected from, at that point in time, was the California Board of Pharmacy. The rest of the states in the U.S. were watching what was happening in California, and they were, if California was to succeed, they would also probably, they were in the process of producing their own legislation and regulation. Florida did have regulation already, and a number of other states already had regulation. And the FDA, from a total country point of view, was also looking at this issue. And again, as I showed you before, the pushpins around the world, the industry understood that this was not just a U.S. problem or a state problem, but this was a global problem, and that larger solutions need to be brought to bear on this issue. So if we looked at, again, the kind of things that we were looking at from a static point of view and starting to do diagrams of how products move through the U.S. supply chain, these are only 6 of the players in the supply chain. There's a lot more. But even here, it starts to become almost too complex to even have a discussion about what's taking place on this diagram. We've got raw material suppliers to contract manufacturers. They also may be supplying directly to manufacturers. Manufacturers may be passing that product back to contract manufacturers, and then the finished product gets moved into the manufacturer's area. Obviously, wholesalers will purchase that product from the manufacturers, and then there's a whole slew of what we would call secondary or more regional wholesalers within the U.S. And then finally, it would be supplied to pharmacies, both retail and hospital pharmacies. In the U.S., if we're talking about a system that needs to meet a certain regulatory date, one of the issues is that there are 3 major wholesalers in the U.S., and they account for the movement of about 95% of pharmaceutical products. And so if you think about those 3, and there may be 3,500, 4,500 manufacturers they need to deal with, and about 2,400 wholesalers and 60,000 to 80,000 pharmacies, trying to test all of that out is nearly impossible. So we've got a limited number of distributors or wholesalers in the middle of the supply chain, and they interact with almost everyone in the supply chain, with the exception being raw material suppliers and contract manufacturers. The other problem is that as we start to develop an understanding of the supply chain and an understanding of the solution, there are multiple scenarios that are put forth. And to be able to understand how those scenarios play out against this complex supply chain was becoming very difficult. We also realize as we go through this is that it's one thing to make a system work. It's another thing to make a system work when there are errors taking place. And in 2008, we identified 33 different errors that would cause product to move back to the manufacturers rather than forward to patients. So all of this had to be tested. All of this had to work correctly, and it had to work for not only very large companies that had resources to apply to this issue, but also very small companies like independent pharmacies that have very little resources, very little IT equipment, very little space even within their pharmacy to be able to manage the product as it became serialized and the data that was expected of them. So we needed to have a clear understanding of how this would flow, how we could manage exceptions, whether it, in the end, would it be able to more securely provide more security for the U.S. supply chain. So there were a number of questions that we had. We have a number of scenarios that we had developed around what was taking place with counterfeit and how it got into the supply chain. There were a number of theories around how you could solve for that, either tracking each item through the supply chain to tracking lots, batches or lots of product through the supply chain. It could be a one-up, one-down model where I understand who I purchased it from, I understand who I sold it to, and the same thing through the supply chain. So you would have to find the data as you move through the supply chain. And then some questions. For any of these different scenarios, can a counterfeit be detected by a legitimate trading partner? So if you remember that any of these legitimate trading partners, all they have to go on is the product that they've either purchased or sold and the information that they have on hand, the reports that they have on hand, to be able to tell whether there may be some nefarious activity or is what they're seeing a true error on the part of their supplier or their purchaser. Can a counterfeit be hidden by an illegitimate trading partner? So one of the more difficult areas is certain trading partners in the middle of the supply chain that are legitimate wholesalers, let's say, but they may also be purchasing some counterfeit on the side and adding that to their inventory. Can the system that's being thought through and being legislated and regulated, can that be detected? So these are questions that are being asked, and a lot of theories coming out, but very difficult to test any one of those theories. And what would be the mechanism for detection? Is it a trading partner? Is it upon inspection at a pharmacy or a wholesaler or a manufacturer? How would that occur, or how could that occur? So a lot of questions, not many answers as of yet. And also, as I said before, what if there were many, many interpretations of the law. So as these laws started to come out, people were interpreting some of the language in the law slightly differently. So we needed to be able to do more what if we interpreted one way versus another way. And again, using static diagrams became very, very difficult because the nuanced differences were difficult to tell, and people sort of get numb after a while at looking at that kind of material. So the nice thing about the simulation that we're trying to put together is that once it was put together, then we could change any of the rules that were taking place within the simulation and then rerun the model and see what happened. Did it create different data? If we looked at the data, could we determine whether a counterfeit had been introduced into the simulation or whether there was an error that was introduced into the simulation, or whether we could actually legitimately track something back through the supply chain? So when we built the model, we knew that it had to be highly flexible because of all these different thoughts and again, working with so many different players in the supply chain. There was a number of things that we learned through this process, certainly working with 17 different players and how their internal operations work and how that affected their relationship and the information that they could provide to trading partners and how they move product. So as we built this simulation, we decided to, as much as possible, that we would alter the behavior of the simulation, and I'll show you how that works in a little bit, based on data as much as possible. And so this is just an example of an input screen before you run a simulation. So on the left-hand side here, you see a number of different processes that we've simulated. We've named them all. Each one of them, I could, by taking this yes and putting a no in there, I could turn it off. In other words, I could tell that process, do your job, but don't produce any data. And that helped us not only debug the simulation, but it also helped us either increase the background noise or decrease it as we ran these large simulations. And then there's other variables in here that we could change that those processes would either produce or react to. And so this was varying the behavior of a process inside the simulation, and essentially varying the behavior of a simulated trading partner, how they would react to information or controls, and how they would react to product that they received or they were shipping. Then we would, of course, start the simulation and run it for a period of time. Sometimes we ran it just for a simulated week. In other words, we would run the simulation and it would do the work that you would expect in a week's worth of time. Sometimes we did it for a month or 2 months or a year, so on, so we could test certain factors that only took place on those given times. So you may be doing reconciliation monthly, so we would have to run the simulation for over a month, a simulated month, in order to generate the data that we needed to do the analysis. And then we would assess the output of that simulation. And how we did that was, and this is an interesting piece that I think is interesting from a technical standpoint, not only were we able to alter the behavior of the simulation by pushing data into the simulation at the start, but at the end of the simulation, or actually in real time as the simulation was running, it was generating data, and we were pushing that data out to an Access database, Microsoft Access database. And that allowed us to have a lot of flexibility in what we were reporting around what was taking place inside the simulation. So we could stop the simulation, pause it, take a look at what was going on, and either start it back up again or make some changes and start it again. And I'll show you how that all works together in just a bit. We can look at the data that was produced. In this case, this particular simulation ran for, I'm not sure how long it took, but it actually produced about 6,100 data points or records or pieces of data that we can then run reports on. We can look at what was shipped at one point. We can do reports based on dates. There's a number of things you can do once you pull all the data out of the simulation and start to understand whether we've understood what the issue was, or could we find issues that occurred. So if we had introduced a counterfeit into the simulation, we could then look at this data and say, we know that we've introduced the counterfeit. Can we actually find it in the data? And I've actually run a number of workshops where it's kind of a lot of fun. I won't tell the workshop participants what we've introduced into the simulation, but they need to find it in the output. And so that's kind of a little bit of a fun thing to do. But then we can also, again, using the power of Access, is produce reports that you would expect to see within your own environment should this law had gone through, and should we have had to implement this in real time. So this is a report that came out of Access. The data came out of the simulation itself, and it's a report that you would expect to see based on tracking and tracing a product through the supply chain. So you see the data there about the product itself. You see the serial number 30 for that a particular vial, and then you see where it's been in the simulated supply chain. So any time we make a change in the simulation, we regenerate this report, and we can also compare those reports together to see what difference occurred. That helped us tremendously in validating the simulation and the processes. It also helped us in debugging the simulation itself. So here's the big picture of the simulation, and I'll explain what you're seeing here. You see three different colored bands going across the simulation, and that's to differentiate between what that simulation is doing. If you've ever seen one of these simulations run, and I will show you this one running, when it runs, you see little balls are running between these various objects. And so these objects are either four things. They're either something that actually generates the object, kind of starts the simulation off. They're a process. They're a holding spot for the object. It could be a warehouse. It could be a shelf, but just a place where something can rest. It's an inventory point maybe. And then there are the outputs where something goes outside the simulation and we're not concerned with it anymore. But that tan band down there, all those processes are treating those balls as products. So in the left-hand column, you see it says manufacturer 001 at the top, wholesaler 001, and provider 001, so that's a hospital. Within the manufacturer's area of the tan band, manufacturer is producing pharmaceutical product. They are packaging that into bottles, and in this particular one there, I just know from memory, they are packing 12 of those bottles into a case, and they're packing, I think, 20 cases onto a pallet, and then they're shipping those to their logistics site. And then at some point, once an order occurs, they'll ship that to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler goes through their process. They'll receive the pallets, they'll break the pallets down to the cases, they'll open up the cases, they'll take the bottles out of the case, and then they'll, upon their receiving an order from the provider or the hospital, they'll pick those bottles, put them into plastic totes, which is just a plastic container. They'll lock the container, and they'll ship it to the provider or the hospital. In this particular simulation, we also took those totes, we opened them, we put them into inventory, the bottles, and eventually they made their way down to a patient, either in a bed or an outpatient facility. So that simulates the flow of the product within the U.S. supply chain, how each of those entities treats the product. One of the things you learn very quickly is that going from a manufacturer's sealed case, almost immediately in the supply chain, 95% of the product is broken down into the eaches. And so that's interesting, because if you think about the law that we're trying to comply with, the law says if I walk into your pharmacy and I pick up a bottle off the shelf, you need to be able to tell me where that bottle's been. So the difficulty in that is that that's not really how we move product through a supply chain. The product moves inside of totes, as I said, inside of cases, inside of pallets. So in order to trace that bottle, we actually need to trace all the logistics units that bottle's been in its lifetime. And so that's what's taking place down in that brown band. Product is being created, it's being packaged, it's being unpackaged, it's being packaged again, it's being shipped, and it's being used or consumed within the provider space. So anything that's happening down there is all about movement of product. And we're recording certain aspects of that you'll see. Where it's been, when it's been there, what is its status, things like that. And we're trying to follow as much of the law as possible within that brown band of what we can and cannot do with that product based on what's happening in the blue space. So the blue space is about information flow. And you can kind of think of it this way, that every time one of these supply chain partners reads a barcode on a bottle or a case or a pallet, they're gathering data about that item. They're gathering data about what the item is and where is it and what are we doing with it. Are we packing it, unpacking it? Are we shipping it? Are we receiving it? And so in the blue space, all of that data that's being collected, which would be normally collected within your internal systems, is being created by the simulation and being stored. And not only is it being stored, but it's shared with your trading partners. So the law says a manufacturer has to provide certain information to the wholesaler about that, that shipment. And that information is called a pedigree. It says where the product has been. The wholesaler and future wholesalers and providers and so on, according to this law, cannot receive the product unless the pedigree matches the physical product that they have in hand. So in other words, if I open up a case and I see bottle number 001 and 002, I need to have an electronic document from the wholesaler that says, I sent you bottle 001, 0002, and by the way, these are the other places this bottle has been in its lifetime. So the simulation also does the check between the data that's coming in the blue band and the product that's coming in the brown band. And what's nice about this is that we're able to alter timing, because there are scenarios where product actually shows up before the information shows up. And so we're able to do those type of things where we need to store product until the information comes in. And if it doesn't come in, then what do we do with it? We need to put it into quarantine area and then eventually ship it back to the manufacturer. So we're showing product flow through the supply chain, information flow through the supply chain, processes based on the law. The one area that we're not showing in this particular simulation, but we've used the simulation with particular trading partners to understand this, is that green band. And so just like the blue band, the green band would represent finance or cash flow. And so any of those processes down below in that brown band can generate information. They could also generate a trigger that would cause you to pay a bill or send the payment or what have you, and you could actually simulate cash flow going back through the supply chain. This particular one, we didn't need to do that, but I just put that up there just so people can understand that they could take the simulation and do that for themselves. So they can alter how they move product, how they understand data, and see the cash flow differences that would make to them. So I just want to, I know you can't read any of this, a little, it's blurry on here, but here's an area where we, I think, affected the public policy point of view. And this is where we had a lot of discussions with the California Board of Pharmacy and the FDA on. So the law says, as you can see above, it says a wholesaler cannot receive an item unless the pedigree matched. So what that means is, if you think about that, if you take if you actually take that word for word, that means that the product will be sitting on someone's loading dock until the pedigree shows up, and now I could match that. In other words, I would need to open up every case in every pallet and match it against pedigree that had come in. I don't know if you've ever seen what loading docks look like, or what they look like in the middle of the summer or the middle of the winter when you have liquid products or cold chain products, but that's not the environment that you want to be opening up everything and laying it out. And so that was a point where we had discussions with the regulators about it's much safer, because their goal was safety, obviously. It's much safer to allow that trading partner to bring that product into their internal warehouse, secure the product, hold it until that that data came and then did the match then. And maybe that would take 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, but the fact is no one's endangered because the product is now stored safely and securely. And so that was an understanding that took place over maybe a 6-month period of understanding the nuances of securing the product, protecting the patients, and yet allowing the supply chain to move product as efficiently as possible. And so their understanding of receiving in general, the word receiving, expanded a bit, and that expansion is what you see in that yellow area, that there may be some what we call pre-receiving or accepting processes. There may be some QA or quality testing of the product, but the product remains in a controlled environment for the period of time it takes for the data to catch up with the product itself. If that period of time goes over, in this case, I know with this particular simulation, we told it 24 hours, so within 24 simulated hours, if that didn't occur, this product that was in these inventory points would then go down into a quarantine area, and then other processes would remove it from quarantine and ship it back to the manufacturer. So anytime something took place in this simulation that was wrong or bad, we had a mechanism of removing that product out of that legitimate supply chain and shipping it back. The other piece here that I'll point out that was interesting in this simulation is that we were able to also simulate criminal activity. So as we had discussions with the supply chain and with the regulators, we talk about how does this counterfeit or diverted or stolen product get into the supply chain? How does it occur? And so we learned a lot about how it could occur and how it was occurring. Those examples I gave you up front, we were able to simulate those examples and how it happened. And also, but from the input to the simulation, we could turn those examples on or off. So we can introduce a counterfeiter into the simulation. At any given time as the simulation was running, we could pause it, we could turn the counterfeiter on, and have them inject counterfeit product into the simulation, and then see how the trading partners reacted to that, and then look at the data. So that was another area where the simulation really helped us understand what was going on and how we could keep both legitimate product and legitimate information flowing through the supply chain and keep it secured at the same time. So that was a simulation, and there's a lot. I could talk for weeks and weeks and weeks on what we did and how we did it. But I just wanted to show you one interesting piece of this that we did, and then talk a little bit about outcomes. So I'm going to run this and talk about what you see here. And really this is about how we managed the simulation and how it interacted with the input and the output. Okay, so running the simulation now. Hopefully you can see the little balls. It may be a little jumpy on your screen due to internet delays, but these balls are starting to run through the simulation. Product is being created, it's being packaged, information is being captured and downloaded. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see some of the areas. Everything with the plus is a process, and it has a behavior that we set through that startup process. We see down here the quarantine area where things would go should problems start to occur, and you see actually there's 38 or 39 problems that's already occurred here. So there's 39 products that are waiting for data. 36, I think. 36. And so what was interesting about this, each one of these processes, we were able to validate with the people that actually performed that process, how they did it, what information they had on hand, and how they would manage the process depending on what took place, and what were the things that could occur that we didn't expect. Now, at the same time, this is generating a lot of data, and now we're going into the Access database that is capturing that data real time. And we're going to take a look at that data. There's a lot of information we could do. This particular one generated, let's see, about 500 data points at that point, and now we can start running things. But this is the interesting piece, I think, that's a little bit different. You could look at a lot of reports on supply chains and how things move through the supply chain, but being as this was about product moving throughout the country, we were able to take the data that the simulation created, move it into the Access database, and then push it out to Google Maps to actually show it in physical space. So here we are looking at a site in Florida. Click on that, and you can see all the data that was in the simulation for that particular site. So the retail they were selling, it's probably a pharmacy, that's the Florida address. And now we're going to take a look at a wholesaler. This is a wholesaler that's unpacking a case that was delivered to them from a manufacturer, and all the information about the case and all its contents at that point in time. So that was just a little look at what you can do with the simulation. This is back to the presentation, but what was interesting about this, we could do criminal activity. We could do odd movements that people may not be able to pick up in reports, but once we push them out to the Google Maps, you could see something go off somewhere that was maybe a little odd for a shipment of your product. And very quickly you could tell that there was an issue. So the outcome of all this that we did from the simulation is the biggest thing is that we gained the trust of the legislators, regulators, both California and the FDA. By them being able to ask questions and us be able to turn around a simulation or alter the simulation to show them it working. Not only static reports or pictures of things working, we could actually show them it running and working, and have people argue left or right. Is that process working the way it should? If the answer is yes, then let's look at the outcome and see what took place. It was amazing how each trading partner really didn't understand why their trading partners worked a certain way until we had these discussions and these simulations were actually running. The understanding that how fast product moves through some of these wholesalers' environments, how they unpack things very quickly, and they don't have time to be either reading a barcode or even taking a case apart as the manufacturers thought they were taking a case apart. The understanding between supply chain partners was very, very valuable. As I said before, we could demonstrate a response to criminal activity. We could turn on a criminal in the simulation and see if any of the trading partners would catch it. I talked about the receiving process. That was a big win, the big understanding that was made with the regulators. We could also demonstrate the difference between criminal activity and legitimate errors. So someone ships you a case, and instead of 12 items, there's 11 in there. That's not criminal activity. That's just something that took place on the packing line. But if we're looking at the data, do we mistake that as criminal activity, or do we understand that that's legitimate error, and how do we deal with that? The geo mapping that I showed you was very interesting to be able to see product actually move in space and time. That could be a map, as you saw, of a country. It could be a map of inside of a warehouse. It could be a map of inside of a hospital, of things moving and timing and things like that. And it was very easy to validate each one of these processes. Unlike a spreadsheet or a diagram, the people that actually did this work, as we worked through it with them, very easy for them to understand what they were seeing and the behavior that they expected come out in the simulation. So next, what we'll be doing next with this is that we do have a new law in the U.S. that's a federal law instead of a state law. So we are developing the simulation for that law that will apply to all states within the U.S. We're also building it in a way that the individual companies can use the simulation. Let's say a manufacturer wanted to use the simulation. They would remove the simulated manufacturer, and they could tie in their own systems to produce that data and see whether the wholesalers and the dispensers, simulated dispensers and simulated wholesalers, would react properly. Could they handle the data? So is the manufacturer producing the right data? Or a wholesaler, we could remove wholesaler number 1 in this case, and they would start to receive simulated data from the simulation from that manufacturer. So in essence, they're receiving test data from the simulation. We are also extending this with certain hospitals around extending the simulation into the hospital. So not only are we tracking it through the supply chain, but we can track it through the hospital, the various wards, where the product would go, all the way down to the patient, and how you would track all of that and capture the information and manage that information. At the other end of the supply chain, we're also working with manufacturers to extend the simulation to track the raw material purchases, whether that be APIs or just raw material or excipients, and look at that flow of product that is coming into the manufacturer, and how that flows to the manufacturer, how they track that product, and then through to finished products. So there's a lot of ways that the simulation itself can expand. Again, it's being developed in a modular style to be able to pick and choose various pieces of it that could be used for different reasons. So it's a very powerful environment. So hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully it provoked some thought in how you might use simulations, and even if you have questions about this particular one or others, I guess, Claire, we could open it up for questions.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Bob. I found that absolutely fascinating. And there's been a couple of questions that have come through whilst you've been talking. So perhaps we could pick those up first, if that's okay. And if anybody else who's on the line wants to type a question in, please do feel free to do so. So one of the questions was, what was you mentioned that you were running workshops, and the question is, what was the participants' reaction to the simulation process? But I'd like to sort of add another bit into that, really, which was if people hadn't ever used simulation before and were part of these groups who you're hoping to roll it out to, how much support do you think they'd need? So it's kind of, I've rolled it into one, really, 2 questions.
Yeah, sure. And I was very surprised how quickly people catch on to a simulation, and how it runs like a game. So they understand it very viscerally almost. I mean, you can do the same kind of thing with spreadsheets and whatnot, but with the simulation, it's running, and it's, I keep saying that it's behaving like you should expect it to or not, and people really do clue in on that. To give you an example, I was running a workshop, and I had manufacturers and wholesalers in the room, and the wholesaler left the room to take a phone call, and so we started working on the manufacturer's area, and wholesaler came back in, and we started to run the simulation. And what we noticed was that the quarantine area in the wholesaler's area started filling up, and I could feel him coming over my back. I feel his breath coming over me. He said, "What's going on there? Why is that happening?" And so we stopped the simulation, we ran some reports, and we realized one of the changes we made in the manufacturer's area was causing this problem. And he got very adamant. He said, "You see that? That manufacturer didn't tell us he was going to do that." And I turned around because, we just ran a simulation. He was very angry. But it shows you how people can really understand what's taking place in a very complex environment and almost react to it viscerally like he was. But it also, in the workshops, running the simulations, people had a lot of fun with them, either turning things on, turning things off, watching how you could experiment with different ways that it could run in ways that would take you, weeks in a static environment of drawing different diagrams. So I actually tried to hide a lot of that busyness that you saw in the simulation.
Yeah.
People didn't like the hidden version at all.
Yes, the actual flow.
Right.
Yeah. They liked the dashboard, did they?
They like to see things move. Yeah, they like to see the little balls running around, and it helped them understand what was taking place, and they felt more, I think, almost more free to ask questions, or also to provide nuances that you don't normally get out of people. And then as soon as you can record the nuances, you can add that to the simulation and make it even better.
Yeah, definitely. Another question, just relating to the national legislation now. I mean, that's a huge piece of work. How do you see the simulation helping people to really get their heads around what needs to be done and put it in place?
Well, right now we've got the national legislation is pretty close to what the California state legislation was, but there are some nuances in it, and so one of the things that we're dealing with now is that they're developing two theories on how it could be accomplished, and so that lends itself really well to simulation, creating two separate simulations, one entirely of one theory and one entirely of another theory, just to see how they perform under different aspects. Like I said, turning on criminal activity, turning on errors in the supply chain, maybe adding a different trading partner to see how it works, because we're trying to balance not only product flow and information flow, but also the needs, the very different needs of the ends of the supply chain. One that ships very large shipments of the same product, and at the other end, the pharmacy that gets these small totes with a lot of different products in them. And so being able to run two different scenarios side to side that represent two schools of thought, let's say, is going to be very helpful to be able to solve for what really should occur. And again, having hopefully the outcome of that be the backbone of what could happen internationally, being able to track drugs as they go through not only the U.S. supply chain but other supply chains.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Do you think, so people will be using this to kind of implement the policy and understand how the process would best work. Do you see it working real time as well?
I do, and one of the interesting things that this simulation like this can do is very quickly it can generate test data. So if a company is implementing their own part of this regulation, they could use the simulation to generate a year's worth of test data, and then use that. I mean, test data is sometimes very difficult, and it's a lot of work to generate it properly with all the different nuances that could occur. Just running a simulation and capturing the data like you saw with that Access database, and be able to use that as input to testing and implementing their own systems is really helpful. And like I said, or like I showed, a simulation can do things that you would not want to even do in a pilot. You certainly wouldn't want to introduce counterfeit product into a supply chain. You wouldn't want to have criminal activity taking place, but we could do all that nasty stuff in a simulation and produce the data.
Yeah. Bob, that's been fantastic. It's been, I think, an inspiration to see that kind of level of modelling that you can do, and how you can effectively engage a whole national system in solving a problem. thank you so much for your time and sharing your work. I know that you'd be happy to answer any other questions that people have, and we have our LinkedIn group, Simulate in Health, and please do continue some of this conversation on there. Also, this will be posted up, as I said, online, and we'll include Bob's details there, so if you wanted to take pick up any queries with him, is that all right, Bob, if people contact you direct?
Sure, that would be great. I'd be glad to talk to anyone about what we did, or even the laws that are taking place in this.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you to everyone who joined, and we will continue this series of webinars, and we'll let you know what's coming up next. And especially thanks to Bob. It's been a great session.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.